As part of the Winchester Heritage Open Days this year, we're delighted to be able to present our film about Warren's, which is one of the oldest businesses in Winchester. My name is Paul Morgan. I'm Managing Director of Warren's of Winchester Limited, and I've been involved in the business since 1988. My father grew up in Winchester. He went to Peter Symonds when it was a grammar school. He'd worked with a couple of clients who developed very successful retail businesses and always had a hankering to do so himself. He went past the shop pretty much every day, so he approached the Warren's family about taking the name and reopened the store in '78, predominantly as a card shop with a small amount of office stationery. Since '88, the business has seen an enormous amount of change, both in Winchester and nationally, and I think the success of what we have achieved is down to noting the trends and reacting to them. For example, in the 90s, every morning we had a shop full of deliveries ready to go out to customers on our own van in and around Winchester, and we got to the point where we were just simply not able to function properly as a retail store and as an office supplies company. So in '95, we took the opportunity to set up a separate facility on the Winnell Industrial Estate, which is about 3 miles from here, and we've grown that without the restrictions of a high street location. One of the great things about being part of a business that's been in Winchester for so long is you discover more about the history as time goes on. Now, when I first visited here in the '70s, aged 11, before the shop reopened, there was a door at the very back. We opened the door and there was this large warehouse and it was completely empty, and the door was a fire door, and we were just stunned by the amount of space. I think the shop even has its own postcode in Winchester. It was that big. We heard terrible news that at the time they cleared the warehouse out, that they skipped a lot of old printers' plates, a lot of the records. It's not healthy to imagine what has gone out. What is great is that over the years, people have sent us things. There was a lady in South Africa who wrote to us to say, my mother died recently and we were clearing out her effects, and we came across this book, and it was clearly published by Warren and Son, and we thought you'd like it. So she took the trouble to actually parcel it up and send it back to us. Over the years, Warren's produced a guide to Winchester, and these guides are fantastic. I've just brought 2 out here. I've got one from 1936, and I've got another one here from 1953/54, and they provide a fascinating insight into business and general life in Winchester. They had a street directory, so you could look up a street in Winchester, and it would tell you who lived there. So in 1936, if I go to Hyde Street, which is a short walk from here, I could see that at number 3 Hyde Street, there was Mrs. Patricia Held. The front section of this book, they had everyone's telephone number. So telephones weren't that common. So looking through this telephone directory, I'm assuming that the early adopters had a very low number, and they rose up from there. So Winchester Fire Station, the telephone number was 3. Warren and Son Limited had a telephone number of 14. So that's not bad. It's my understanding these books were commissioned and printed by Warren's and distributed to the local community. So gathering the information to go in one of these was a huge task. Street directory alone was an enormous task. They often had pull-out map. You could look at Winchester and its development. The second one I got here is from 1953. And I looked at this when I got it, and there's a publisher's note in the front. The publishers regret the delay in issuing this directory, which has been caused by the shortage of staff due mainly to the housing difficulties and to an abnormal amount of illness. Consequently, they've had to give precedence to customers' work, and their own publications were held up. Unfortunately, during this period, houses have changed hands, and though they have tried to keep up to date as far as possible, there are bound to be errors, especially, you can see the tension here, especially as so few householders ever notify the publishers of any change of address. Obviously, we've all had a fairly tricky time recently. Here we are in 1953. Warren's had its own challenges relating to staff and sickness. One of the most interesting things was a trench map which we framed because I felt it needed to be preserved, it needed to be seen. I had no idea that Warrens used to print trench maps for the First World War. One assumes that these were updated manually, given to the soldiers coming back for R&R. They would be sent to Warrens, who would reprint them, and another set would go out updated and more accurate. I think it's very easy to gloss over some of the pain that's been experienced in this country over many years, and it's great to see that over the years Warrens has played its part locally and nationally, and in this case it was involved in helping the war effort. The last Warren family member that I remember meeting was Nicholas Warren. His nephew was a local businessman called Jim Sawyer. Jim Sawyer took the trouble to find this and give this to me, and it's a beautiful certificate produced by the staff in, we assume, 1935 to celebrate the centenary of the business. And there is a list of all of the staff that worked here in 1935. And at the bottom it's got Atlas Printing Office, High Street. And it's a great record of what was going on. You can see that there's a lot of history and a lot of time spent by Warrens in the Winchester community.
My name is Chris Wilson, I'm manager of Warrens. Warrens is one of the oldest independent retailers in Winchester. Warren & Son was established in 1835 by Nathaniel Warren as a printers and publishers, and it was located on Parchment Street. The business moved here to its current site at 85 High Street in 1859. Nathaniel lived with his family on the floors above. The site had originally housed the local courthouse and was the home of the prison governor. After the accused had been found guilty and sentenced, they would have been immediately taken through an underground passage to the city prison on Jury Street, which is now the old jailhouse pub. Nathaniel died in 1860 and the business was taken over by his son, William Thorne Warren. By 1866, William expanded the business, branching out from solely the print business and creating a stationery and fancy goods store. William had 4 children, including Harold and Frank, who would go on to run the business. In 1896, William bought the Hampshire Observer newspaper. Frank Warren acted as the newspaper's editor. Following Frank's death in 1957 and his brother Harold's 2 years previously, the Observer was sold, eventually merging with the Hampshire Chronicle. In the same year, the retail business and print works were sold to Taylor and Francis, who to this day continue to print and publish scientific journals. 1957 signalled the end of the direct ownership by the Warren family. However, Nicholas Warren, Harold's son, continued in the role of managing director until 1972.
My name is Kieran Phelan. As a resident of Winchester for about 40 years, I go past this shop many days of the week, which led to me thinking all these pens lend themselves to the craftsmanship of writing poetry. And when Winchester Poetry Festival was kicked off in 2014, there is now a Hampshire Poetry Prize, and Warrens makes a gift of a pen for the best poet based in Hampshire on every year. So it's a great and continuing relationship. We're very proud of it. The shop has a great publishing heritage itself, and I think that the shop and Hampshire Record Office and other agencies might make more of that. I think there's a lot to be said for building on it. I mean, Warrens used to publish the local newspaper, it published guides, street guides, dozens of books, maps, and to some extent, you know, the Poetry Festival has kind of picked up on that heritage. And this is a little book that arose out of a Poetry Festival Poet on the High Street initiative, a man called Johnny Fluffypunk, who is a great character, and he has written a poem to Warrens. You want pens? We've got pens. Pens for every conceivable need. Pens to write, to scribble, to draw. Pens so ergonomically gorgeous they make your heart bleed ink. And the staples. Don't talk to us about staples. Actually, Do talk to us about staples. You will find no human anywhere who knows as much or loves or cares about the minutiae of stationery as us.